All right. Let's just take a sip of water. Lube up the pipes. Welcome to Everything EFL podcast. My name's Erin O'Byrne, and I absolutely love sharing my knowledge with you, my darling teacher, and helping you build not only community, but your students' confidence. I truly believe that a positive frame of mind is essential for your students to learn. There's also a bunch of other teachy stuff thrown in for good measure too. Are you ready? Let's go. Hello, you gorgeous teacher. Welcome to Everything EFL podcast. If you are one of my lovely regular listeners, welcome back. If you are a brand new listener, you are most welcome. I'm really excited about this week's guest. She mentors and empowers new and novice special educational needs teachers. Please welcome Jessica Guarnieri. Is that okay?
That's perfect.
Okay. Welcome. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much, Erin, for having me on. I'm honored to be here.
It's an absolute pleasure. I mean, just based on the conversation that we had a while ago, I just think this is going to be a very interesting, informative and helpful episode for everyone who, I mean, not even with just special educational needs students, but any sort of behavioural issues. I feel like you may be able to just shed just a little bit of light on just giving teachers maybe just even a starting point to, you know, getting to grips with certain behaviours. So before we go any further, why don't you just introduce yourself a little bit more for the people who don't know you?
Sure, absolutely. Just to quickly piggyback on what you just said there, the things that we'll talk about today and the strategies and the mindsets that I have to share definitely are able to be put to use for all teachers. We're kind of going to talk about human nature and relationships and things that will benefit, quite honestly, not only students, but adults as well. So I have 21 years of experience in the classroom, ranging from early childhood education, parent education and support, elementary education. All these areas have been in what we here in America call self-contained settings. A self-contained setting is students with special needs not participating with their quote unquote general education counterparts. So that's my educational experience, working with students with autism, students with behavioral issues, students with trauma, severe learning disabilities. And I have also participated in coaching and professional development for new special education teachers. And that looks like supporting them from the college campus into the classroom. And in those first years where they're very green, right? Mm-hmm. Very unsure, very confused, and just helping them to really get their feet under them and empower them to be able to make the decisions and stand firm in their beliefs and in their strengths, and helping them with their areas of need. So those are the things that I'm really passionate about.
And I think that's wonderful. Like, you know, even I think mainstream teachers have got a far more difficult job than I have. But even like just going back to my first 6 months, my first year, you're crapping yourself. You don't know what you're doing. And you need as much support as you possibly can.
Yes. Yes, it's so true. And you don't know what's right and what's wrong, and you don't know what's up and what's down. And so just to even just have somebody there to say, oh, you're okay. It's okay. Everything's going to be okay. You've got skills. You still have the things that you had before. It just is going to look different in the delivery. And that's okay.
I love that. So going back to the word trauma, do you agree that, first of all, I've sort of got two sort of kinds of trauma that I'm thinking about, especially from the last few years. I think lockdown was quite traumatic for a lot of students and teachers, but I would say, you know, students. And also over the last few years, we've had waves of refugees coming over. Now, obviously, they're going to bring a lot of trauma. And if they're young as well, I mean, they probably don't have any tools to cope with it or know how to kind of express it or channel it or something like that. Do you agree with that?
I do, 100%.
And without getting sort of too graphic or personal, what kinds of trauma have you encountered the most in your experience in the classroom?
I have experienced a wide variety of trauma in my students. Some of them living in poverty situations with all the things that come from poverty, with parents with mental illness and substance abuse, physical abuse, mental abuse, neglect, things like that. I taught a little girl, this was about 5 years ago, and sweet, sweet little thing. I know we're going to talk about what trauma kind of looks like and how it presents. And I'm going to share this little girl. We will call her Sally. That's not her name. We'll call her Sally. She was a fourth grader when I had her. Sweet thing, very reserved, very, what we would call well-behaved, presented with some learning disabilities, but no real behaviors that were problematic for her. And one day she was home and they were playing hide and seek. And she had a breakdown in which she remembered some very serious abuse that she had forgotten. So then working through that with her family and with her and what that looked like, so things like that have come up throughout the years. That's the only situation where someone had really blocked something out and then it came forward. But I share that to say that this little girl, you never would have thought that she had any trauma in her life. You wouldn't have known, you would have just thought she had, quite honestly, like intense learning disability.
That's the thing. So, it must have so many faces.
Yeah, it really does. And it has to do with, an individual's personality and an individual's makeup, but then also what kind of trauma they experienced. And, were they beaten when they acted out? So then they became reserved. Are they a more of a fight kind of a person? So they're going to come at you. Like there's so many different, I guess my point is you really can't look at a person necessarily and say, oh, that's trauma or, oh, that's not trauma without knowing them more.
Yeah.
And
it's interesting that you mentioned poverty, because I would say that not a lot of people would automatically think of that as trauma, especially if you're not from a background, with poverty. So that's really interesting. It wasn't something that came to my mind, but like you say, there's so much other stuff that goes with it. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of the mainstream school teachers listening would, understand and recognize exactly what you're saying. Mm-hmm. So how else in your experience does trauma present itself?
Well, that goes back to the many faces of trauma, right? And so it can present itself. So if we think about fight, flight, freeze, and appease, how is a person going to those responses? How are they going to react? But here's the thing, trauma physically changes the composition of the brain. Trauma increases norepinephrine in the brain and cortisol hormones in the brain, which are stress hormones, and causes a reaction. So people who either don't have trauma, really pretty much everybody has trauma. The thing about it is how you deal with your trauma. And A death can be a traumatic experience. An illness can be a traumatic experience, a car accident. It's what happens, excuse me, it's what happens immediately after that traumatic experience. And is there someone there to support that person in a loving, accepting, caring way and buffer their responses so that they can functionally get through it in a healthy manner. So when someone does not, what we're really talking about are children who have not had that support after these traumatic experiences, right? And so you're going to see one of the responses of fight, flight, freeze, or appease. The little girl I was talking about, Sally, she actually was functioning in the appease reaction, and she wanted to do everything right all the time.
I was wondering what appease was, because I'd heard of the other ones,
Mm-hmm.
but not that. So just trying to just do everything right and get everyone's approval and.
Right.
Okay.
So it could look like that. It could look like somebody just stopping and staring or walking out the door, or, the most common things we think of are the quote unquote behavioral things where there's throwing chairs and yelling and screaming and, all that stuff. Absolutely. That's one area. So really what it comes down to, Erin, is knowing your students.
Yeah.
It really goes back to, you have to have a relationship, a good, positive relationship, and be a safe space for where your students, when they come in, so that you can get to know their baseline behaviors, so that you can get to know how they think, what they like, what they don't like, what their triggers are, and what calms them. And that way you can impact their lives for the positive. And quite honestly, a lot of times we're not going to know the trauma that's happened in their life. So I guess what I'm saying is, to focus on what is the trauma can almost be counterproductive, because parents don't have to tell you, and kids a lot of times don't have the language for it.
If a teacher thinks their student has an underlying problem due to trauma, what would you advise is the best way to approach this?
Sure. Well, the first thing I would say is, when teachers work in silos, we really isolate ourselves. And what I mean by silos is by saying, this is my room and I'm going to do it my way, and you can come in and you can pull my kids out, but this is really my space. And as a teacher, I totally understand that, because I'm in charge of what happens all day long, and I'm the one the parents are going to call. And I'm the one who has to report to the administrator when something goes wrong, right? As the case manager. However, when we do that and we take on that role for ourselves, what we've effectively done is pushed away all the help that we can get.
Yeah.
And that ends up causing, honestly, trauma for the teacher, and then secondarily for the students. So my suggestion is to start the year functioning as a team, having open communication with everyone that's around you that has input into the students. So it wouldn't look like the teacher next door necessarily, unless you're co-teaching with that teacher. But it might look like the counselor, might look like whoever are the people that have input into the students in your classroom's lives. Work together with them, because all those different perspectives are going to strengthen what you have to give. And it doesn't make you as a teacher less valuable. Everybody has their own value, but it helps you all to be able to create a more valuable program for the students. So that being said, when you have that, you don't have to be the master. You don't have to be the one who knows it all. So if you're suspecting trauma or you're suspecting something that's out of the ordinary or something just doesn't feel right, I've taught kids, Erin, where I've thought, nothing's really specifically presenting here, but I just have a gut feeling something just doesn't feel right about this situation, and I can identify it. But I go to my team and we work through it together. So when you do that, you can then look at the triggers together. You can look at the reasons why things are happening together. You can come up with things and a program that can positively impact the students. But when you do it together.
Yeah, I think, having spoken to a lot of teachers kind of forget that they may have a support system around them.
Yeah.
And they tend to work quite isolated, it seems. And your point about, my room, my way, I remember us talking about this, and I shared this information with some teachers and they were like, oh yeah, like if, you have to be a little bit flexible. You can't go into the class going, okay, right, today, if anybody acts up, this is what I'm going to do. And, because like you said, it's damaging for you. Your stress levels are just going to go through the roof. And then the second that someone misbehaves and it doesn't go the way you want it to, your stress levels are going to go up again. So that flexibility and kind of accepting, I think we use this word a lot, accepting, like accept the fact that it might not go your way and there might be issues and let's try and deal with them as they come up rather than my way or the highway. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And for me, that's part of my own self-care, right? So we know, especially in this post-lockdown world, how stressful education not only was, but has become and has added to this, the stress level that we as teachers and educators have exponentially. So self-care has become so much more important. So one of the most important things for me is talking to teachers and empowering them to, quite honestly, Erin, it sounds very selfish as a teacher, but put yourself first, right? Like we put on the airplane, they tell you, put on your oxygen mask before you put on somebody else's. We need to do the same thing as teachers so that we are in a good headspace and in a good emotional space to be able to give out to these students who we know we're going to have to give to and we want to give to, so part of self-care is having people around you that can support you the way you want to support your students.
Yeah. And I think even just opening up and leaning on your colleagues in the staff room could be a massive help because, I've worked in lots of different schools and some staff rooms are really open and supportive and it completely changes the dynamic and some are not. And, you go in feeling alone and you leave feeling alone and there's no reason for that. There's just no reason for it,
I completely agree. That's really one of the things that I'm very passionate about is creating and helping schools to facilitate and create really positive environments for teachers. It's funny because there's at least here in the US, I'm not sure how it is in other parts of the world, but here there's a lot of talk about wellness for administration and wellness for school leadership. There's almost no talk about wellness for teachers.
Which is staggering considering. It's like bottom of the barrel every time,
Right.
It's
and
unbelievable.
I think that as teachers, we can do better. We don't have to accept that.
Yeah.
We don't have to accept that. And we can do it for ourselves. Teachers are some of the most innovative, creative, resourceful, giving people that as a group that I can think of. So let's start doing that for ourselves.
Yeah, I completely agree. I do believe that a lot of creativity does get stifled under the weight of the job. And it's such a shame because I firmly believe that creativity is like one of the keys to happiness. And if you can unlock that and use it, you know, in whatever way, especially in your job, though, to make your job more enjoyable, it's an absolute gift. But yeah, I do think there is a lack of support from all sides for most teachers, you know, in any kind of industry, whether you're mainstream or private like me. There's definitely a lack of that. Okay, do you have any tips and strategies to help teachers deal with students who are maybe acting out regardless of the reason?
Yeah, I sure do. So all that being said, first of all, I'm going to say, take care of yourself.
Yeah.
For real, for real. And then second is relationship. So a lot of times, Erin, we think, oh, I have to get these rules in place. I have to get this structure in place so that when things go wrong, I've got something to do, which absolutely is true. But part of that structure needs to be the relationship that you form with your student, because a lot of times it's going to be the relationship that is the currency you're going to use to de-escalate and kind of dismantle those behaviors and those structures that the children are functioning out of. So we worry a lot about the content, which we're told we need to worry a lot about the content. And we do need to think a lot about the content, but we're really not going to impact a student with the content until they know that we care, right? They don't know how much you care until, or how does it go? They don't know how much you know until they know how much you care.
Yeah.
Right. So that being said, stemming from that, some real functional things is think about behavior as a symptom. You're not fixing the behavior. You're going to the root and looking at the why. So why is this child behaving this way? So let's take just something real basic. Every time somebody comes to math class, a pencil gets thrown and a paper gets ripped. Student is sent out the door down to the principal's office. Okay, so if we look at the reason for that, well, is math difficult? Is the student embarrassed that they're unable to do the work? Is it first thing in the morning and they come from a home where they're not getting breakfast? Are they absolutely exhausted because their parents are up using substances all night and they don't get to sleep? Is it late in the day and they know they're going to have to go home to something? Is there a girl there? Like, there could be a million and one reasons why that's happening. But if the function is to escape math and you're sending the child out the door, well, then the child's getting exactly what he wants. Right? And so the behavior is the symptom. But if you're able to address the issue and use your relationship to talk to the child and figure out what's really happening, well, then you can come up with something that will help them. So maybe they need some food in the morning. Maybe they need 5 minutes of decompression time in your classroom. You know, maybe they are embarrassed. And so you can create a time where they come to you on lunch hour and help them with the problem, so that when they come and you ask them a question, they know they've got that question ready to go and they're prepared and not going to be embarrassed in front of their classmates. You know, so looking at the reasons why the behavior is happening is really, really the most functional thing that you can do, and utilize your relationship to get there.
So do you have any other tips or strategies where teachers could deal with sort of immediate disruption or immediate anger or something like that?
Yeah, sure. So really, you want to make sure that you as a teacher remain calm. So if your energy is going to match the energy level of the angry student, the situation is going to likely continue to escalate.
Yeah.
So make sure you take a deep breath, get your thoughts in order, and remain calm. I know it can be very intimidating and very stressful when someone is really escalating, it takes an incredible amount of self-control to remain calm, but that will help so much the environment. The next thing you really want to do is look around the room and really do some assessing. Can I keep this child in the room? Can I get the rest of the kids out of the room? Do I try to move the child? Do I try to isolate? So you want to kind of assess for safety and look at what is the safest option right now. And then you want to take that action. So sometimes that action might just look like saying, okay, I'm just going to sit down and everybody take out your books and start reading. Sometimes that action might look like a directive statement to say, it's time for you to do this. So again, it's going to be based on the relationship that you have and what you know about the student. What do they best respond to? And then you're going to use that as kind of as collateral. And you're going to say, okay, you want to make sure that the child knows that you hear them. You look very angry right now. I understand that you are very angry. And they'll tell you, I'm not angry. I'm frustrated. I'm not sad. I'm mad. You know what I mean? A lot of times if they're verbal, they'll tell you, and then you can say, okay, why don't you tell me more about that? For the most part, if we're talking about older students, you want to have them talking, right? Because if they're talking, then they're venting, then they're letting out stress. Now, these are just general, Erin. There could be definite specifics for specific students and, based on what the specific plans are. But some general things for students is you want to assess for safety, remain calm, and you really want the child to know that they're heard and that they're understood. Because isn't that what most people want?
Yeah, and I don't think they're expecting it either. They're probably expecting a reaction, and I would imagine that a lot of students do act up to get that reaction as well. And keeping calm is definitely, it's everything really, isn't it? What do you think about like incorporating like breathing practice into like classrooms?
Absolutely. So there's a plethora of things that you can do preventatively, right? So we want to have those options in our classrooms as preventative measures to try not to get our students to that point of higher escalation. So absolutely, breathing exercises, talking to them, letting them take breaks, self-care for the students, right? Who talks about self-care for the students? Helping them learn how to do these things, modeling and having conversations about, what? We all have emotions, and sometimes we get angry. I've been amazed at how many students believe that just being angry is a bad thing. Well, anger in and of itself is just an emotion. It's what do you do when you're angry? But a lot of times students don't understand that. They think I can never be angry. And then they're angry, and well, then they're automatically wrong because they have this emotion because of their belief.
And they don't know what to do with it.
Right.
Yeah,
and so if we go back to our students with trauma, they don't typically have as much language to share. Their statements are often disconnected because with those higher levels of stress hormones, like we talked about earlier, they're going to be doing things that they don't even necessarily always recognize why they're doing it. So they may not, honest and true, have the language. So then being, you asked about something very practical, being able to say, well, it looks like this math work is very upsetting for you? Do you think, you know what I mean? And giving them some language and some options that they can then come back and say, oh yeah, that is it. I do feel that way. Providing that language. Movement breaks are great. Fidgets are great. So back to the whole who's in charge, right? So if I'm in charge and a student needs a break, well, I can't give you that break because I need to do things and get my content in and do it the way I need to be doing it. Well, then you're probably going to see more behaviors, because if that student can maybe work in the back of the room and pace around and still get their work done, well, why not?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of teachers might hesitate to change their strategies when dealing with any kind of behavioral issues because, at the end of the day, change does take time. And I think a lot of teachers get quite stuck in their ways and they kind of fear trying new things. What would you say to these teachers?
Well, I guess my first question would be, are your strategies that you're using, are they there to meet the needs of your students, or are they there to meet your needs? And that might be a trigger question for some people, Erin. And that might be something that you really have to look deep in and be very honest about with real reflection and real honesty. If my goal is to support and empower and grow my students, I'm going to act in one way. If my goal is to gain compliance because I'm the teacher in charge, I'm going to act a very different way.
That's a really interesting question. And I think I imagine a lot of answers would be they're meeting their own needs.
Probably.
Yeah.
But if we take it a step further, and if we say my goal is to meet the needs of my students, then flexibility isn't even necessarily seen as flexibility anymore. It's seen as the thing that is required to meet the needs of the students, right? I'm not being flexible and moving from what I really want. I am being flexible because I can give this child this and this child that and this child that. I'll tell you another thing that I think a lot of teachers, and I've talked to a lot of teachers, and they will say, well, I can't give something to one child and not to another. And I think a lot of the fear that you're talking about, Erin, comes from that idea, right? Like, well, I can't give him a break because the other 20 kids in the room are also going to want a break.
Yeah.
Well, I will tell you that in my experience, and I have worked with students with, like I said before, pretty involved autism, pretty involved behavioral concerns and trauma and stuff like that. And I really don't have that one for all kind of philosophy in the classroom. And what the kids learn is that everybody gets their own plan. And when you need something, you get that thing that you need. So Bobby needs a break and Timmy needs a fidget. Well, when Bobby wants Timmy's fidget, the conversation then becomes, is a fidget really helpful for you? Or is a break more helpful for you? And he'll say, oh no, a break is more helpful for me. Right. A fidget is cool and you can use that at recess. This is a learning time and everybody gets what they need. And so even my young elementary students with very involved disabilities are able to understand and embrace this.
Yeah, and I just think that kind of explaining things rather than going, nope, you can't have that, and that's the end of the
Mhm.
conversation. Like, like talking to them like people
Right?
can go a long way. Yeah, yeah. Just, I mean, these things are very simple, and I imagine a lot of people are saying, yeah, but like, yeah, but there's always a yeah, but.
But
Yeah. But I
yeah, but
think,
try it.
yeah, but try it. I mean, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So if you're not getting different results, then just take a leap of faith and just try tweaking your reactions and behavior a little bit and see what happens, guys, see what happens.
I would encourage Erin, this is a lot, and this is a very different mindset. And over
mm,
the 21 years that I have been teaching, I started as a teacher who needed control, and I have ended as a teacher who tells her class at the very beginning of the year, we don't have any rules. I'm not in charge. This is your room. And that was a 21-year journey.
mm,
And that's okay. So my encouragement is, if this is hitting with you as a teacher, to choose one area. You don't have to make all the changes all at once. Choose one area that you think, you know what? Maybe this year I'm not ready to adjust my whole classroom philosophy, but I can start by bringing a team of people around me.
yeah, or just by breathing and not shouting.
Right.
Just one thing. Yeah. I mean, I
Yeah.
always say everything is a process. You cannot expect your mindset to shift immediately. You cannot expect everything to go smoothly. You have to kind of dive in, try new things, see what works, see what doesn't, but give it time. And that's the thing. A lot of teachers don't have the time and they don't have the patience. They're tired, they're burnt out, they're pressured, they're stressed. So, the thought of just trying new things can just be too overwhelming. But like you say, just one little
Mhm.
thing, just dip your toe in the water and see how it goes.
Yeah. And you know what? It's not all going to be peaches and cream,
No.
but the cool thing is that once you kind of embrace this, you realize that it's okay for the kids to see something fail. It's okay. It
Mm,
shows that you're human, because they fail all day long. Right. And so to come into this room where somebody wants to present as though they don't make any mistakes, they know that's not true.
yeah. Yeah.
you know and so being able to say, well, I tried this thing, and you know what, it didn't work, guys, that's going to go a long way in relationship forming.
Yeah, definitely. Just showing any sort of vulnerability is very,
Mhm.
very, very useful for building those relationships, I think.
Yeah.
So where can people find you, Jessica?
Yeah, thanks for asking, Erin. I am on LinkedIn and Facebook as Dedicated Designs Consulting. My email is Jessica at Dedicated Designs Consulting. And I don't have a website right now. It's being built as we speak. But if you find me on social, I would be glad to connect with you and talk a little bit more about this if you're interested in that at all.
And you're also on Instagram, aren't you?
I am Dedicated Designs Consulting.
Okay. I'll put all of those links in the show notes, guys. Jessica, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your experience. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me, Erin. And I hope that what I was able to share today is helpful to some of your audience.
I hope so too. And I'm pretty sure it is. Okay, guys, thank you so much for listening. As usual, have a safe and peaceful week and look after yourselves and share the love. Bye.